Welcome to the Neuro Diaries podcast. I'm your host, Jade Rose, writer, speaker, and mental health advocate. This podcast is a safe space where we can amplify our voices together. My mission is to make the world a safer and happier place for neurodivergent children and those struggling with mental health conditions and mental illness. The Neuro Diaries podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. This episode was recorded on Narrego country. This podcast openly discusses mental health issues and may contain content that is distressing for some. Please take care in deciding if this content is right for you today. Breaking stigma through stories. Welcome to the Neuro Diaries podcast. Welcome back to the Neuro Diaries podcast. I'm Jade Rose, your host, and today I've got Christine Doyle with me. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Happy to have you. Now, Christine is on Instagram as christine.doyle.ie. Is that it? Or is it christinedoyle.ie?
christinedoyle.ie.
christinedoyle.ie. There we go. She is a psychotherapist and a coach focusing currently around autism and ADHD and unlearning autism in particular. So I wanted to ask you about that, what that phrase means for you. What is unlearning autism?
I suppose starting to talk about my autistic experience on Instagram. I was already on Instagram as a psychotherapist, and then last year following my diagnosis really used my space to be able to talk about my autistic experience. But my autistic experience and talking about that involves a lot of the unlearning. So the unlearning is not something, because I never learnt anything, but I certainly absorbed messages and I absorbed understanding of what society deemed it is to be autistic, or the only way to be autistic, or what that might look like. So for me, as I'm going through my unlearning, full of mistakes and blunders, which I'll make today as well, but I think in opening up conversation about neurodivergence, we have to be unafraid to make mistakes, that our intention is to learn more, but in the learning we have to acknowledge there has to be so much unlearning, because there is so much that is stereotyped around what it is to be autistic, that meant that when I received my diagnosis, I just was in this world of confusion, because everything that I thought I knew didn't really seem to fit what I thought I was. Yeah, so for me to learn and to understand myself and to understand my autistic experience, it involved a lot of my own unlearning. And I just felt that really that, what we experience is not singular, and that I felt that was what I was being met with or what I was seeing in society. So that's why I felt, talking about the unlearning of autism is the only really place to start when we are trying to learn what it is to be autistic, which I don't think any of us really fully, know now, which is a good place to be, where, there's a real space of exploration and openness now. But I think, as long as we know we don't know, we can learn much more easily.
I love that. I've sort of always saying the first step is just to get curious and just start thinking about it, acknowledge that there's things that you don't know, and then just ask more questions, find out more information. So I really love that. I think it's one of those things where you start to feel like something might not be quite right, or wondering what's going on with you or with a loved one. And then, often we turn to Google and, plug in, could it be autism? And you look at traits of autism, and, straight away my experience with my loved ones was like, no, can't be that. Doesn't match what Google says. And then we go on 2-3 years down the track, and then sort of on this same journey as you, as just learning actually autism can look like many different things. There's so many different ways it can present. I think Instagram and TikTok and, having people share their story openly on there is really part of the solution, and, part of the helping people as well, because I wouldn't know so much about how autism can present if it wasn't for, particularly the women on there sharing what it is like to be a female with autism. It's not what we expected.
Yeah, and I think there's something, an added layer to all that, Jade, is that as an autistic person, I understand things very much in black and white terms. So I speak about this with regard to, so I started running about 6 months ago. For the first time in my whole life at the age of 45, I never ran because for me, in my mind, and people think this is me being hard on myself, but it's not. It's a black and white thinking mode. So for me, what it looks like to be a runner is the person who's running along, not breaking too much of a sweat, quite happy, obviously very fit, quite agile, going at a good pace. And I know that's not me, so I know I'm not a runner. Um, and so I kind of go, well, I can't do that. I'm not a runner.
Mm.
And everyone around me, without understanding that that's a neurodivergent way of thinking, will kind of say, you shouldn't be so hard on yourself. Of course you can do it, but I can see the runner in my mind, and I know that's not me. So when you think of that black and white thinking mindset, and the one way of what it is to be autistic, well, every neurodivergent, woman who has black and white thinking is going to say, well, that's not me. Not because that's not what I want to be, but that's what I understand it to be. So the world, because we take in so much information all the time, my world is very overwhelming. So it's really, really soothing for me to go, okay, well, that's what running is. So I know that now, that's in that box. I don't, you don't need to figure that out anymore. That's what I don't know, like Da Vinci, his paintings look like, and so I kind of know that, and that's in that box. And that's what autism looks like. So I know that that's in that box. And
Mm.
so when the before the conversation and the dialogue of what a neurodivergence, and through the neurodiversity framework we spoke about what it can be like to be autistic, the black and white thinking mind totally excludes neurodivergence or autism from the realm of possibility. So I never considered I was autistic because I knew what running looks like, and I knew what it is to be autistic looks like. And those two were not for me. They were
Yeah.
not what I saw. They were not something that I could identify with. So it's not there's no judgment, there's no distancing. It's just this black and white understanding makes being autistic unavailable. So the only thing then that was available to me, certainly as a mental health professional, was I was either well or unwell, that I was either mentally well or mentally unwell. That any stimulation of thought or feeling anxious in group situations or getting overwhelmed quite easily must all be some kind of anxiety or stress, but certainly not autistic, because again, I know what that looks like, and my black and white thinking totally blocked me from being able to explore it any further.
Do you know what's really funny is that for a lot of people, autism and this black and white thinking is, also called literal thinking. And when I was listening to you say it, I'm like, oh, okay, black and white thinking. And then I wonder if people, listening could, sort of identify with this as well. When I'm thinking, oh, do I do black and white thinking? No, because I don't think in like black and I don't think in white, or it's not like, one or two options. Sometimes there's multiple options. So I can't be a black and white thinker. And that's it, right? You take it so literally.
Even and that's why we can minimize Instagram or TikTok or whatever, but this exploration of conversation
Mm.
is what literal thinkers need. That it can also look like this, and this, but we need to see it, we need to experience it. But before we spoke about it, because certainly in Ireland, autism was something that was quite fear driven. People were afraid, to even open the box or talk about it. And it was only spoken about really, if at all. We didn't speak about it much. But, certainly not in the spectrum of what it is to be autistic, but in, one or two ways that again didn't allow so many of us to even Google it,
Mm.
because so even if
Yeah.
I got as far as Google, it would have been better, but no, no, it
Y-
just was not something. It was like, it was like, would I ever consider that I could be, I don't know, that I could be French, and I have said that before, kind of that's, you know, I never really Googled could I be French because I kind of know I'm not French, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like if I
That's a good
had known,
example.
I
I
would
get
have,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would have loved to have known earlier.
Yeah. Well, I'm keen to get into that more. But before we do, I just wanted to come back a little bit and just find out more about who you are. So, part of the Neuro Diaries is giving a bit of a face and a voice to some of what these diagnoses means, because even as an autistic person, like, you're so much more than an autistic person. You've got a whole life, everything going on. So I'm keen to hear what your life looks like, at a high level on the day to day. Who is Christine?
Yeah, you know, it's funny when you look back and you see why you've made the choices you've made. I suppose I'm constantly seeking calm, and yet I am always seeking meaning and purpose and just, meaningful connections as well. So sometimes the two don't really meet. But yeah, I live in Ireland. I'm Irish, and I love the sea. I'm a mum of three. I'm a wife. I'm a professional. I'm self-employed. Most autistic people don't work within the, general 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, work for big companies. A lot of us choose to find other ways to be able to work that doesn't require so much stimulation. Brave, calm, and I've created a very calm life. I love books. I'm started one book club. I'm part of a second. I dip in and out of a third. I constantly have my Kindle on the go. I love the color purple. That's been my forever love all through my life. I don't really love group settings, but I've got a lot of really great individual friendships.
Amazing. Thank you for painting that picture. I love that. And I guess we've already, figured out, disclosed that you're autistic. We know that that looks differently for everyone, as we've sort of said as well. What particular traits or, experience of it do you find the most prevalent for you?
Yeah, it was funny when I discovered myself to be autistic. Um, it answered really why I feel overwhelmed a lot of the time. So, overwhelmed again without the language of neurodiversity sounds like anxiety or stress, whereas for me it's a lot of overstimulation. So knowing that and knowing about the nervous system and how important it is to balance the nervous system of all of us. But our nervous systems generally, autistic people, our nervous systems can be more dysregulated because the environment is more stimulating for us. We tend to take in a lot more information on a sensory level all the time. So that language really helped me to, yeah, to understand myself and understand really what it is to be autistic for me. Um, Differences then in I suppose what I deem as, or what I suppose what my brain prioritizes as important, and so I'm not so good with I struggle with dates or remembering things. I'm quite forgetful. I have lists upon lists. I work really hard to remember things, and because that is deemed as being really important in society, that we show up on certain dates and we remember certain things. But for the autistic person, it's who we are and our intention and how what we think about people and how loyal we are, that we feel is really important or is really important to our brains, and that's what we prioritize. So, but I understand that isn't something that is understood maybe quite as, that can be confusing for people when I forget things. So yeah, that's something that I really understood. Looking, even like things like how I how I behave, so I do lots of gentle stims, like twirling jewelry, twirling necklaces, just to kind of stimulate a thought. Actually, it's often to draw thought as opposed to a nervous reaction. It can help me kind of draw thought, or help me think, help me regulate myself. I always kind of look away when I'm trying to think of something as well. There's so many different ways, but I suppose, you know, overall, it's answering that overwhelm. I suppose feeling that space of being overwhelmed a lot, and yet not feeling myself to be a very anxious person felt very confusing for me, and the confusion, and also being misunderstood sometimes, and misunderstanding situations. That was quite confusing for me because, you're kind of getting along in the world, and you're gathering years, and yet I still was confused by some situations, or would be misinterpreted, or I was misinterpreting situations, and that kind of can be confusing. And it leads to then again, trying to learn more rules and trying to, do better. But again, the world is already so overwhelming that trying to learn more and do better on someone who's already overwhelmed, yeah, it kind of just reaches capacity, and it can become too much.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. Um, I can see, like, just from our chat, that you're obviously a very high masking autistic. You present very well, you have an established career. Um, how how do you mask, and are you conscious of masking? And how do you manage, with your clients and with your day to day sort of, you know, coming across and doing a lot of neurotypical conversation preferences? How does that feel for you now that you are conscious of it?
Yeah, so I often, a lot of my clients now are neurodivergent, because I talk a lot about what it is to be autistic, and to a lesser extent ADHD. So I feel the ADHD impacts me slightly less than being autistic. A lot of my clients, we both know ourselves to be neurodivergent, and so that is a really beautiful space to be in. And that allowing and that mirroring and that unmasking and that freedom is wonderful, and it can really support then going out into the wider world, even just experiencing that and feeling that, and my clients feeling that, and it can help gain a lot of confidence in being more true to who we are. But in terms of the mask and being conscious of the mask, like, absolutely not. Like, when I got my diagnosis almost a year and a half ago now, it was a real question of, well, who am I? Because if a lot of this is high masking, what I'm seeing, or how I am is high masking, what's beneath the mask? And it's really, really hard to start. Where do you start with that unmasking? So where does it happen, or will it drop one day? I mean, I didn't know. And the biggest unmasking is the unmasking with the self. The biggest unmasking for me has been not pushing past my gut, not pushing
Yeah.
past my intuition, because before, my intuition and my gut was deemed wrong. You shouldn't do that, or you should try harder, or why did you do that, or, getting a look or getting an eye roll, or being seen as being a bit, unusual in certain situations. So you learn where the gut is, that's where you need to try harder, not that that's what you need to lean into. So the unmasking is a really gradual process, and it's certainly beginning with me. But there are situations where I am very unmasked. They're like, particularly around autistic joy. So autistic joy is like the euphoria that I think is the gift of what it is to be autistic, and it is very easily accessed and fully felt. And when I'm in the sea, I'm the one whooping on all the waves, and my children can be looking at me going, mum, they're not whooping, and they've every right to whoop, they're only kids. But no, I'm the one who's whooping, and I absolutely adore the crash of every wave, and I let it all out. And I'm the one on the sideline of my kids' soccer matches, jumping up and down, really excited. But I never understood that was unmasking. I couldn't understand why other mothers weren't jumping up and down. How could everyone not be so excited that their kids were
Yeah.
playing soccer and, feel fully immersed in it? So there are situations where I see that now and I love it. It's
Mm.
now when I jump a little bit more intentionally, or I kind of celebrate the jump. Now when I whoop in the sea, I'm so I'm so grateful for that whooping that's natural, that comes out. But then on the other hand, I notice when I'm highly masking. So
Mm.
I notice when I'm in situations and I feel really uncomfortable and I make myself really small, and I nod along and I don't really ask questions. I just smile, and or I might be over exuberant and I might talk, a lot, or but I feel really, really, really unsafe, I think is
Yeah.
really what I feel. And there are certain people that I know to, maybe not have so much interaction with, or to mask quite highly around because I know it's not safe. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, so the mask certainly is a very unconscious process that was um, applied over 45 years of recognizing the eye rolls and recognizing the people recoiling or people pulling back, or recognizing when something wasn't appropriate, or recognizing and learning and learning and learning and learning how to mask up so that
Yeah.
you're not vulnerable and you're not bullied and you're not exposed and you're not isolated and you're not left behind and you're not left out of a group chat and you're not uninvited. So it is something that is that I don't think that we will, I don't think that the goal is to be fully unmasked. Even in neurotypical society,
Mm.
there's masking, there's
Yeah.
persona and there's how we behave with certain people. But the more I can unmask to myself, that's my goal. And then with
Yeah.
that, then I can choose where I feel safe to, and that's my right, and I can choose where I feel safe to be fully unmasked, or I can choose that maybe it's safer for me to be a little bit more guarded in this situation. And I think that is something we all do, but not knowing that you're neurodivergent and not knowing that you have put on, that this mask has armored up over so many years, it's recognizing and knowing and seeing your own mask, and um, gently letting that go, or unmasking to yourself, is for me the biggest thing. And sorry, now I know I'm going on a little bit, Jade, but
No, you're
another
right.
part of that is noticing. So before, maybe where I would have felt the overwhelm building up, and now if I notice that, seeing that as what it is, seeing that as overstimulation, or I've exposed myself to a vulnerable situation, or I've taken on too much, or maybe I've gone back into people pleasing, or whatever it may be, I've kind of overloaded myself a bit. And it's then kind of saying, okay, well, look, I know now that this is why I feel this way. So how can I support myself now? Because, that is as a result of kind of coming away from a situation where maybe I was masked. So I acknowledge now, and even after this, where this is kind of, although really, really joyful for me, is quite, energetic for me. I will need a lot of quietness and downtime, and so recognizing that and just yeah, being aware of that for myself is the
Yeah.
biggest part.
I love that. And that's, the power of the diagnosis and getting, an accurate reading on yourself so that you can then learn to make accommodations for yourself that, give you a greater quality of life and make life easier for you. So that's just amazing that you're able to start learning about that and doing that for yourself. It sounds like a very healing sort of process that you're working through. So that's really
Yeah.
nice. How did you come about getting, your diagnosis, at a later age as well.
Over the last while, I've read so many memoirs and books from late identified autistic people, and all speaking of, kind of wondering about it for years and kind of, looking at it, maybe leaving it be and kind of coming back to it again, maybe when they felt more ready for it. And, because how can you explore what you don't know? So you almost have to be in the space of exploring what it is to be autistic before you can go for an assessment to find out if you are autistic. So most people, when they are looking at an assessment, will have explored a lot of the nuance of what it is to be autistic beforehand. Whereas for me, someone close to me mentioned that they felt they may be ADHD, and in a bid to support them, I realised I knew very little about ADHD, and I went and explored it and listened to a lot of podcasts and read some books and watched Instagram, YouTube. And as I looked into it more and more, there were a lot of things that I could identify with. So I looked up and researched to see if actually maybe this is why, things can be really confusing or overwhelming for me. Maybe this is the answer to a lot of things that I've always kind of been searching for, because a lot of autistic people, especially, late identified autistic people who have internalized a lot into their minds for so long, are seekers. We're always seeking answers. We're always seeking. We can be quite spiritual. We can read a lot. We're very interested in personal development and trying to figure it out. So once I kind of understood ADHD a bit more, I said, Jeannie, maybe this is what I've been seeking. Maybe this is an answer. Maybe this will help me understand things. And so I researched and got a psychologist, linked in with a psychologist to assess me. And I knew at the time that she diagnosed ADHD and autism as well, among other things. And so we'd spoken about that a little bit, but I kind of said to her, look, I think it's ADHD I'm looking at, and had really pushed everything. Nothing else was even in my realm. So when we had the diagnosis, she said to me, oh, we might just look at a few other things here, or we might just ask a few more questions here. But I was answering her questions really just to maybe help reconfirm that it is ADHD we're talking about. So never in any of the questions, although I knew it was the autism quotient questionnaire and other questionnaires and tests that we were going through, I just thought it was going to just eliminate anything else that could possibly be in the mix to reconfirm what I thought I was, confirming. The day that I received my diagnosis, which was my 45th birthday actually, was the day I received my diagnosis. It was just a bolt from the blue. It was absolutely knocked me down with a feather. Couldn't believe it. Until that moment, I had been exploring what it is to be ADHD, but I had no idea what it is to be autistic. I had no concept of neurodiversity, no understanding of the nuance and the spectrum and how it shows and how it's experienced by different people. I just had no understanding of what it was to be autistic. So to read then that I was autistic was absolutely terrifying, to be honest. Because I suppose the only thing that I had understood was that it was something that was othered. It had certainly been very othered in our society, in Ireland. You didn't want to be that person who was different when I was young. And in actual fact, in Ireland, we've got a really complicated history with people who are perceived to be different, and a really complicated history with mental health and mental health asylums. And so it was quite fearful to be known to be different when I was growing up. So to be told I was something that I knew nothing about, except that maybe it was different, was terrifying. And absolutely out of the blue. So total shock diagnosis for me.
Happy birthday, I guess. I guess. And that sounds like a lot of like that initial reaction is that internal stigma coming out from what you've learned growing up. How did you begin to move past that fear and that, initial shock, terror, internalized stigma?
Y- You know, there was shock and terror and a lot of internalized stigma and a lot of internalized ableism. And I was really, I kind of judged myself a lot for that. I was really angry as well with my profession, that in mental health training in Ireland, where, in my university, but also in any of the other universities I've explored, um, autism, ADHD is not taught at all. The only thing that we are told is that it's
Yeah.
something that we don't need to worry about. So I was, I did judge myself, but in actual fact, that's, society's learning with, that's how we absorb information in society. When being autistic is spoken in hushed tones, or, when it's kind of minimized, or, well, you're still great anyway, or, it's when it's spoken in the way that it is spoken, if it's spoken about at all,
Yeah.
how can people feel anything other than terror and fear? And so there was terror and fear, but it quickly went into anger, anger that I felt this terror and fear, that I grew up in a society that feared being autistic. And that was the messaging that I was taking in from society. That as a mental health professional, I felt ashamed. I felt ashamed that I didn't know this sooner. How many people had sat with me over the past 10 years who I could have reached more easily, or I could have supported more wholeheartedly had I had more training about what it is to be neurodivergent, because certainly the world is more difficult for us. It's not the world that we're meant to really be in. This world doesn't really fit me. So if the world is more difficult for us, then we're going to end up more in therapy rooms. We're going to be questioning things more. And if neurodivergence isn't on the table, we are really doing such a huge disservice to so many people who are going to therapy, who are questioning whether or not they are unwell when all they are is wired differently.
Yeah.
So that made me really mad, ashamed for a while. But, I kind of let go of that shame because that was going to block me from moving forward. And I had no other possible option, I felt, because nothing was available to me. So at that stage, I was on Instagram as a psychotherapist. I was quite highly regarded. I had a good following. And I felt, okay, well, all of these people now maybe can know what it is to be autistic, can maybe listen to my story and see a version of someone that they maybe wouldn't have, feared or othered, or all of these things that society has, subconsciously made us feel about neurodivergent people. That if I show up as me and the next day I show up as me, and this is also what it is to be autistic, that maybe that can help,
Yeah.
help people think, or help people consider, or help people relate, or, so yeah, so like many autistic people, then, a lot of awareness and advocacy became a real passion of mine. I want the world to be safer for neurodivergent people. I am not one bit ashamed of being autistic. I just think it is, it's amazing. It's, we get fully lost in these wonderful conversations like I'm having today, the possibility of autistic joy. I feel my feelings absolutely and fully, which can be difficult at times, but it's amazing as well. I express myself wholeheartedly, and very courageously. I treat everyone the same. I have a deep intuition. I'm really glad of it. I see things very visually, and I love my creative mind. I feel the regulation of nature so quickly, and it really soothes me. And all of these things that it also is to be autistic, I speak about, and I want awareness of. There's nothing to be ashamed, but that's the message I was given. The message I was given was one of shame and fear, and I don't ascribe to that at all. There are difficulties, 100%. There are struggles, 100%, but most of those are societally driven. Most of those are me outside in the world, not here. Here I'm very content. Here I'm very content. It's being misunderstood by a society that doesn't understand neurodivergence. That is the difficult part. So if we can create a society that understands and advocates fully what it is to be autistic, not just I support you, and I'm aware of being autistic, but also when you blurt out or when you whoop or when you jump or when you interrupt, that all of that is part of who you are. And I accept all of that fully, and I celebrate all of that fully. And you don't need to do better or do differently. That's just you. That's how you are wired differently. There's no malintent in the behaviors that you exhibit. You are, still, and always a full human person, just showing yourself differently, because of your neurotype. That, when we get to that stage, I feel the disability for me, who has quite low support needs, will be less and less. But for right now, the struggles, although they are there, um, if I'd known then, a year and a half ago, what it actually is to be autistic and the diversity of what that means and the differences that it is, because all I heard was deficits, all I
Yeah.
heard was wrong, all I heard was fear and shame, and all I heard was disorder. And those words didn't belong to me, so I didn't understand them, and I didn't understand how that could be me. But so the using kind of that neurodiversity language, or the neuroaffirming language, has really helped me to really understand what it is to be autistic, not what society deems it is to be autistic.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love the work that you're doing. You have such a powerful energy. You're so articulate about it. And just this idea of if you like if if you can be an autistic person, it just goes to show we as a society have no idea what an autistic person is, because it's
Yeah.
not just the 10 bullet points on Google. It's
No.
so much more. And if we can change our understanding to show a picture that involves you in it, and I'm just like you as an example, or all the different presentations of it, of what autistic people could be. Yeah, it's totally reaffirming, re-challenging that stigma. And that's the whole goal of this podcast and having these conversations as well, is amplifying this, putting it out there, so that you do have more freedom to show up in the world as that joyful person, as your full self. I can imagine standing on the sidelines of your son's soccer game and wanting to jump and yell and cheer, but then looking around at the other mums and just realizing oh, that's not what we do. No, we don't behave like that. And then schooling yourself into, a minimized expression of that joy. I mean, that's sort of what autistic people learn, and particularly females, as they grow up. Is that looking around, that observation, oh no, I can't fully show that here. But part of this journey of realizing and accepting is letting yourself have those moments of joy.
Jade, I think what's really important to note as well is I have huge privilege. I am, I'm a professional. I earn my own living. I'm married. Have a wonderful family. I'm white. I'm middle class. I operate from a very, very privileged position. So actually that person who's whooping on the sideline minimized myself. I only reacted to eye rolls. So I would jump on the sideline, but when I saw the eye roll or someone saying, Jeannie, Christine, do you want to join the team? Or, someone challenging me, was when maybe I put myself back in a box. But because I'm white and middle class and I live in a very privileged country and I have a very, privileged life, and I'm very autonomous, I can talk about these things and I
Yeah.
can behave the way I want to behave because it's safer for me to do so. But it's not safe for everyone. And
Mm.
it's not safe for, people of color or different cultural backgrounds, or people of different class structures, or people who are stigmatized or minoritized because of different ways society deems people, are our children, our, younger generation, like I am 45, well, 46 now, I keep forgetting my age, but 46 now, and I live my own life. How I'm received doesn't really bother me. It never really bothered me, but for a time, you have to get by. You live in society, you need to be employed, you need to, earn respect of others. You don't want to be on your own. You want to be in community with others. You don't want to be shunned. So I can do that, but not everyone can. And I don't think that's the goal. The goal isn't that, the goal is that society changes, not that we necessarily become braver. I use my voice because many can't. And I don't think that they necessarily should, because it's not safe for them. And, someone I was speaking with recently, and she's a young 20-year-old in her early 20s, and she was saying, oh, I think I'm going to speak about mine more now. And I said, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You don't have to see me and say, I need to do more of that. You look at where you are and don't push past yourself. And I think as autistic people, we tend to do that as well. We tend to go, oh, right, so that's what I need to do now. I'll do that. This is my new plan. This is my new way of being. But very few of us are privileged enough to be able to say, I am proudly autistic. This is what autism looks like as well. Very few of us are in a position where we can articulate ourselves, where we have a platform we can talk about it. And I really feel as a society we need so much more training, we need so much more awareness, we need so much more support of celebrating difference rather than judging difference. We live in such a judgmental world that my message isn't to other autistic people to, loudly jump and whoop and as I do, or speak about it maybe as openly as I do, but be aware of what's safe for them, and maybe keep curating space that is more safe for them. The space that I've created, I work for myself. I work a lot with other autistic clients. My husband is wonderfully supportive and affirming. My friends all understand what it is for me as I do for them. I live life. I'm not one available to many.
That's beautiful that you see that and acknowledge that and call that out as well, because I hope, some audience might be listening and do come, fall into that position where they don't feel quite safe to express that. I think for myself as well, being able to speak out about mental health so openly and be bipolar quite openly and hold this space for other people as well. I have to acknowledge as well that also comes from a position of huge privilege where I just, in my personal life and circumstances, I know that I'm safe to do this. I can declare that I'm bipolar and there's not, I know that there's not going to be any repercussions, negative repercussions of that. Now, I know, like potentially previously when I was younger and in a more sort of like in unstable jobs and things like that, and, more unstable relationships and friendship dynamics and not have that support circle around me, definitely wouldn't be able to be this openly, out of the box and also speaking about it so confidently and having a message behind it. That's really only a very recent thing that you get once you've got the stability there and got the safety. Really, it's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs where you've got the safety and the support, and then right at the top is that sort of actualization where you can start to live for purpose and put that message out there. So I think it is a goal to work towards, because it's really part of like human condition is that you want to reach potential, but I think it's a really good point of thinking about where you are and where you fall on that. And yeah, it's definitely a privileged position as well, that not everyone may get to the point of being able to reach that. but just wherever you are in life and in that hierarchy, just finding yourself and finding and curating, as you said, I love that word, as much safety and as much well-being and accommodating for yourself as much as you can within your environment. So that was a really beautiful message.
I safety, is just crucially important to
Yeah.
autistic community. And as you talk about that hierarchy of needs, sometimes we need to keep coming back to that safety one, whereas that isn't something that needs to be maybe pondered as deeply when you're neurotypical. And I know I was talking to a neurotypical friend recently, and she said, "Oh, for me, friendship is fun. That you can go out and just have loads of fun." And I said, "For me, friendship is safety, and
Yes.
everything centers around safety, and where I feel safe. And sometimes I don't feel safe, and so I pull back. Sometimes I don't feel so safe in myself, not in a life or death situation, but I just feel more vulnerable. So that part around safety, where I feel safe, yes, that's maybe where I feel I can talk more about things, or anyone who's listening may be able to talk more about things. But always just be aware and not push past your own
Yeah.
intuition of where you feel safe.
Yeah. And that's really important to say as well, because I think people might see me talking very openly on the podcast and yourself as well and on our Instagram pages. But I think part of it is that these online communities and having these really open conversations in this environment, this is curated specifically to be a safe space for us to have these conversations, to be neurodivergent, to be really open about this stuff. I don't show up this way in my day-to-day life. I don't openly tell everyone in my day-to-day about my mental health history. I share very rarely, and only after I've known people for a significant period of time, enough to build that trust and to feel safe with them, would I actually share this information. So it is that, as you said, sort of reading the intuition, not pushing past. I think just because you have a diagnosis, it never means that you have to share that diagnosis. And it's about finding this I've been really sort of learning more about psychological safety, and particularly in workplaces as well. How do we create an environment of psychologically safety from, and it shouldn't be on the neurodivergent person to have to create and advocate that for themselves. It's more looking at how do we change the culture of the neurotypical structures so that they have more understanding and can create this environment that can create more well-being for people with neurodivergence or mental health conditions.
And I think there's so much conversation, certainly that I'm hearing. I don't know if you're hearing the same, Jade, about schools and how so many children are just not able to go to school with the way the school system is set up at the moment, and the expectation that is there for some children who just feel that or can't meet that expectation or meet that way of being. And there is so much that we need to listen more to. We've been again pushing past and wanting kids to fit into a model that really doesn't reflect the diversity of how we all experience the world and how we all thrive. So I feel there's so much education and awareness from the lived experience of neurodivergence. And I think that's a huge thing that's changing as well, is that until very recently we were told what it is to be autistic. We didn't hear what it is to be autistic. So it came from, men with and women, but from professional standing, rather than actually listening to the autistic voice, because the autistic voice wasn't deemed to be trusted. It was deemed to be ill-informed, or whatever it was deemed to be. I don't know, but it was certainly not listened to. So training and awareness and just openness around neurodiversity and explaining what that is from the lived experience, and from conversation with, not from or about, but with neurodivergent people, us all getting together in a room and exploring things and really listening with open curiosity, because sometimes we can listen and we can nod along, but we still believe what we believe, and we just
Yeah.
placate and we, but it's, that listening with real, actually, maybe I could learn something from this. And I think as well, it's trusting that all behavior is information, that every time someone is behaving in a certain way that is at odds with what you perceive to be the way people behave, well, there's something that we need to understand more about that. Rather than judging behavior as right or wrong, there's a message in behavior, there's a message in the statistics, there's a message in what's going on. This is not school refusal, because school refusal
Yeah.
implies choice. There's no choice here. These kids are not able to go to school. People are not able to show up consistently in the workplace. There's so much employment support around, well, there can be around, mental health, although there isn't enough, but certainly not around the root cause or the understanding that maybe the way that and the expectation of kind of showing up in this industrial revolution type setting doesn't really support the thriving of and the creativity of the neurodivergent mind, or those who are struggling with mental health. But if we trust that their message is something that we need to listen to, rather than we know the way and you need to abide, that we collaborate and we explore and we understand and listen. I suppose that human element, that we're all human beings, expressing ourselves, but I think fear brings a lot of judgment, and again, not wanting to raise your head above the parapet, or not wanting to be, again, in
Yeah.
our, that it's really hard, as you said, for the autistic person then maybe to advocate for what they need in work, whereas really it should be on offer for all of us. And if I need to avail of that need, I do, and that I'm
Mm.
trusted to make the right decision for what is relevant for me. But there's almost this cap and rule, and you need to apply for, and you need to be given permission for, and rather than just understanding that maybe we trust the person knows the best way that they can thrive, and that we're
Yeah.
really lucky to have that person, and whatever they need to do, that's okay. Yeah, I just feel there's so much more allowance that could be there, and
Yeah.
support and openness that could be there. Um, at the moment, yeah, the training is
Mm.
insufficient, the resources are insufficient, and the stigma is still very much there. But there's a lot that can be done, that could make the
Yeah.
world safer.
And particularly in schools, as you said, I mean, in the workplace, it still has its own challenges, and particularly, for late diagnosed people who are still coming to terms with it, or even for people who have had their diagnoses, for years and years, it's still always challenging to raise your hand and raise your voice in a world where, stigma is still very alive and present. And it's just got, I think you said earlier, it's got such deep, strong roots that it's within the last century that we had, all these horrors happening in asylums, and we had people locked up, and we had lobotomies, and we had, you know, stuff to that extent, not even just to mention the shame and the ridicule and the exclusion and things like that. So it's really only very, very recent that it's even feels slightly okay and slightly safe to start, you know, popping your head up and talking about some of this stuff and putting your own face and your own name to it. It's very scary, but at least in the workplace or as an adult, like you do have, sometimes you have the option or the capability. Sometimes some people might have the ability to do that. Whereas in schools, like it's so hard on those children. And unless they have a parent that really does see and notice and advocate for them, how do they get that support that they need when these school systems don't recognize and don't support, their needs as well? I've had a hard time this year watching my son he's in preschool. He'll go to school next year. But we had a lot of struggles this year sort of with his preschool environment that just didn't accommodate his needs. The environment was so, like, I walk in there and I'm like I'm so overstimulated. in like 10 seconds of walking into the room. And it wasn't so much an issue when he was younger, because he didn't notice other kids. He had no like awareness socially. Like, he was very object task driven and really familiar with adults as well, and just would go hyperverbal, would go and have conversations with adults. And then when he turned 4, he really realized that there was like this social world and this social game at play, and he wanted to be involved in it, but he didn't know how. You know, and that thing of like missing a lot of the social cues and not understanding how to join play, and then also getting that, you know, rejection sensitivity, and just being, you know, absolutely distraught and, you know, brought to meltdowns over that experience as well. And I just really found that, you know, the educators, as lovely and well-meaning as they are, don't really know how to support through that. And the environment's not set up unless you have your diagnosis in hand, which takes months and months and lots of money to get, and then can provide or find or fund a support worker to be in there and offer additional support. The resources just aren't there to offer that support to your child that has those additional needs. And it's, you know, that's been my experience with preschool this year. And then it is scary thinking about stepping into school as well. And we're lucky within this area, and coming from the place of privilege that I am, there's one grammar school where we feel it's going to be a really good option and give him the support that he needs. But that was never our intention. Like, we, you know, I was always completely fine with like the public school system, but then having him and looking at him and his needs, I'm like, he's going to be so lost in that school system where the, you know, the class sizes are 30 plus, and it's just so big and, you know, chaotic. And like, if I had no other option but to send him there, I just know how much he would struggle in that environment. And he might even still struggle in the other school. Like, we're yet to cross that bridge. But yeah, it's gonna, like, I already know I'm preparing myself that like it's not going to be the stereotypical mum journey of just sending your kid off to school and, you know, having them go through that fairly untroubled. It's going to require constant check-ins, constant advocation, accommodations to be made. Already, like, so many extra parent-teacher meetings and things like that. So it's a whole extra, you know, mental load for parents and children on top of it, just to fit them into this, you know, societal mold of sending them to school.
Yeah, you know, I really hear that, and it's you know, I suppose, you know, one thing is, like, for you, Jade, you're seeing it and you're knowing it, and you are in a position then to be more aware around it and to advocate for your son. You know, when we don't see and we don't know, and, you know, a lot of people can't know, it's too much for them to take on, and then they're not in a position to advocate for their children. You know, that adds another layer. And just to, you know, give a good news story is I support a lot of families as well, and you know, I do support parents who are advocating for their children in school. And some of these parents don't yet have a diagnosis for their children, but the behaviour shows that the environment is too stimulating, that the way that their day set up is not supportive for them to be able to learn efficiently. And, you know, through coaching and we've kind of gone and spoken to those schools, and the schools have been so receptive. Like, I do think we are at a turning point in history where they can. Obviously, you know, sometimes we need, you know, a diagnosis or a bit of paper to be able to get some of the, you know, additional resource, you know, one-to-one resources or things that will cost the school a lot of money. But my experience recently has been that the schools that I've been linked in with really want to know. And the more that we, you know, as the, you know, as the parents or the older generation, or, you know, me as the therapist or the coach for these families as well, can be in a supportive role where we learn the language and where we ask for what we see that the children need and explain, you know, how that will help their thriving and their regulation within the school system as well. Because obviously often autism can manifest in a lot of extra energy, so for me a lot of my extra energy will go up into my mind, into overthinking, but for younger people a lot of the extra energy is like a lot of that need to move as well.
Yeah.
So as we can advocate with that information, my experience recently has been that schools want to know, and as much as they can, they want to support, they want to be receptive. And yeah, so I am seeing that change, and it has been really wonderful to be in those meetings and sit with those parents and hear those children, being accommodated for with or without a diagnosis. So that has been, things that I think are
Yeah.
improving.
Yeah, that is really beautiful. I'm really glad to hear that. And I
Yeah.
do see that as well, that people are receptive and open to the conversation and also wanting to support. Like, that's been very clear that, like, we are taking his needs seriously. And it's just this, like, this journey of learning together of, like, well, what is going on here? I, I think I was surprised. I've been surprised that no one in the education or caregiver sphere came to me and flagged anything or told me anything. Because for me, I guess, like, me and my husband were like, well, he's our first kid. The first of all of our friends, all of our family to have a child. He's the first one. He's our standard. Like, we don't have any other sort of reference point. And I think we knew that he was different in some way, but being the first and only one, and also having this sort of, sometimes it's this motherhood thing that you hear back when you talk about, this is really hard. I'm struggling with this. Like, this seems like just really exacerbated, like massive behaviors, like, and you're just sort of told, well, that's boys,
Yeah.
or that's motherhood. So, and it's kind of very reductive in a way.
Yeah.
But then I was sort of expecting people to, who have been around a lot of children or who have been in caregiver environments for years and years, to point it out to me and say, no, we actually do, validate my sort of thoughts that, yeah, he does present quite differently. So we kind of we really waited until his behaviors reached a point where someone did call them out. Whereas in hindsight, I think we could have acted on that a lot sooner, acted on our instinct, in
Yeah.
knowing that.
Yeah. I've met that as well with mental health professionals, and I've met that with people that I felt would know.
Mm.
But with the mental health professionals that I linked in with, for some of them, they follow the medical model of what it is to be autistic, and that's what the research shows them, and that's what the stats are, and that's where all the studies were done, and that's what they were taught. And so for them often is the biggest unlearning, that they have really learned that way. So I've met that um, challenge, I suppose, within the mental health industry, which I'm part of. And as I said, I had very little awareness of it as well. I wouldn't have been in a position to point it out to a mother,
Yeah.
in many ways, um, because it wasn't part of my training. And also, you know, as well, it was kind of something that I shouldn't really, because it wasn't part of my training. The hidden message was it's not something that I have authority really to say anything about.
Yeah.
And also then, if we take into account that in the greater society, there is still a level of fear or othering around being neurodivergent. Well, sometimes, someone who maybe doesn't have the confidence in their voice or experience of, neurodivergence, or is really engaged in a lot of training around it, doesn't want to say that if they could be wrong, So I think that there is,
Mm.
our caregivers, our teachers, our preschool teachers, our mental health professionals, they're being given such a disservice, because they are in these
Yeah.
vital roles where they can, spot um, areas that these kids
Yeah.
could be supported better, or adults could be supported better, but there's so many still being missed.
Yeah.
But I think that that's because, again, society as we're still changing so much that it
Yeah.
hasn't reached yet, even this year. And I looked it up in the training of mental health professionals, training of psychotherapists and counsellors in Ireland. It is not regulated to have modules or, integrated training on neurodivergence still.
Yeah. Still,
So we're
that's
still,
wild. Yeah.
yeah,
Because
we're
I
still
think about,
producing therapists.
I also think about like educators, like teachers. They have a whole, 3-4 year degree. One unit on recognizing like neurodivergence in your students, and like that's all it would take to have an initial understanding.
Yeah. I mean, I hope it's coming. I really do hope it's
Mm.
coming. But it's not surprising to me that for something that is quite stigmatized still, that someone who hasn't been trained and given appropriate and
Yeah.
neuroaffirming training in what it is to be neurodivergent wouldn't have the confidence to be able to say, look, I wonder, could we have a discussion about some of the behaviors with your child?
Yeah, that's totally fair enough. And I think they wouldn't know how I'd react as well. They don't know that like I've, I'm super open minded. I have training in psychology and,
Yeah.
philosophy and like just in general, like tell me, please tell me, like tell me the information. But they, I guess they don't know what they're walking into with another parent. And then some people might react, you know, in unfavorable ways, I could imagine. Well, Christine, I've so enjoyed our chat today. It's been so much valuable information, I think, come out of today's talk and you sharing your messages. I was wondering if you could leave us with, if there's one thing that you would like either the neurodivergent community or the neurotypical community to understand about autism, what would that be?
Something that I really advocate for is the permission that autistic people have to thrive, be joyful, and live life fully. The messaging I understood was that to be autistic was to struggle to such a degree that you would never live a full life.
Mm.
And sometimes I feel that when me or other late identified autistic people talk about thriving and talk about joy, it can be judged because we almost don't have a right to that if we are autistic. And that is true through the medical model where we talk about deficits and we talk about disorders. Being autistic is absolutely a disability, but for me, it's mostly a societal disability.
Mm.
Have to curate my life. I do have to choose where to put my energy. My capacity is lower. I have to be very aware of my nervous system. I have to mind myself very well. I am learning much more to trust my intuition much more deeply. But doing all of that, I am a very joyful autistic person. I am thriving. I am happy. I love my mind. I love living in my
Yeah.
mind. My mind is a really curious place to be. I take in loads of information. I'm always pattern seeking and finding things where other people don't. And I just want to, leave with that message that autistic thriving is something that I advocate for and is possible for many of us, and is something that I am really privileged and glad to be able to say I am achieving.
Thank you, Christine. That's so beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much for coming on today. If you want to connect more with Christine, just call out her Instagram again at christinedoyle.ie. You can also find links on there to her coaching and the works that she is doing. So if it feels right for you to connect in with her, if you're late diagnosed autistic yourself, or if you're just grappling with that identity piece at the moment, a lot of the resources that she shares do paint this picture of autism in all of its different presentations that aren't, very stereotypical. So it's a great way to get more information about what that might look like as well. I've loved, just observing your content over the last several months as well. So yeah, lovely to meet you, and thank you so much for coming on. Enjoying the Neuro Diaries? Every interaction helps break the stigma, so be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favourite podcast listening app. visit our Instagram at the Neurodiaries Podcast and join our Facebook group to continue the conversation. Through sharing and connection, we can foster understanding, empathy, and support for all.